Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, and listeners, here we are again, and we're following on with the series from the book Turbulence by David Banmiller. And it seems crazy to keep saying it, but a 50-year veteran and expert and Red Adair of the industry and many other accolades and titles. But David, nice to have you back again. Really appreciate it and looking forward to today's session.
Good to see you. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, and I've got to say, my friend, you're looking better and better. I think as my hair's getting longer and I'm beginning to look like a out-of-work biker, you're beginning to look a lot more executive style, shall we say. You're looking good.
Well, I zipped up to the club and got a haircut yesterday just for you.
Nice one.
And
nice one.
At the risk of making everyone envious, everything is open here in Palm Springs. Outdoor dining, indoor dining. People still wear masks, but the local pharmacies are giving the jabs. Pick a time and go get your jab. And the combination of that, plus people that got it and are now immune, and so on, it's become safer and safer. And within a 3-mile radius of where we are, we have everything you want, from pharmacies, doctors, restaurants, fabulous restaurants, golf courses, and everything's moving.
It's amazing, Dave. Sorry, I'm just leaning over there, close the door. I've got the dogs barking. It's amazing, though, how quickly now things have racked up in the States, huh? The vaccines are rolling out at a crazy speed.
Yeah, they really are. And I think, not to get political, but this just didn't happen in the past 2 months with this administration. It took a lot of time and effort to get it to this stage, and it is really cracking. Yeah. And there's more other vaccines coming, and people are talking about variants to the vaccines in case other variants to the problem occur. And and I'd have to say the UK, if you look around the world, because that's what you and I do.
Yeah.
If you look around the world, and we suggested last time, politicians are in an impossible situation no matter what they do, and so are scientists.
Exactly.
Because they just are. If you say it's going to go left, it goes right, and right, left, black or white. You don't know. I mean, you just have no idea what's exactly going to happen, although we're smarter than a year ago. So that's helped us. And I was just today watching the airline stocks, which I have some of simply because I bought them when they were in the tank, because I figured, they're going to survive. I was a little worried about bankruptcies and balance sheets, especially with some of the ones that have poorer balance sheets and too much debt and that sort of thing, versus a Southwest that has the strongest and Ryanair. But these airlines are up 50, 75% the past year in terms of stock market.
I know, it's incredible.
And the traffic was, let's just say on average, 2.5 million passengers a day on average running through TSA for security, which is a good judge.
Yeah.
It went down to like, a couple of thousand, and then 20,000 and 25,000 and 50,000. And last week was, I think, 1.2 million. Yeah. So it's definitely over 50%. And it's recovering a little bit faster than I had thought. And I do believe there's pent-up demand. That's pretty clear from many economists.
100%. Yeah. No, I think it's going to just explode, and then it's going to keep going for a little while, and then people are going to be facing all other types of pressures and problems with how to cope with the restart, the bring back better, bounce back better, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be a totally different ball game, but on the more positive side. So that's a nice thing to look forward to. Now, today is session 8. It's chapter 7, navigating rules and regulations. And of all the chapters we've gone through and the remaining chapters, none actually start with such a focused first sentence. So in the interests of keeping things smart, sweet, and clean, I can't use the actual wording, as you didn't either, but to give people a little taste, the opening line is you, and it begins with F and ends in ing, academic eggheads, you're going to wreck this industry. So that's how it started. A great start for any chapter in any book. And
I think you need to
statement.
I think one needs to understand, and I was fortunate to live before and after. deregulation.
Yeah.
And what's shocking to me, from a, let's call it political point of view, Jimmy Carter, as a Democrat, was a strong supporter of deregulation.
Yeah.
And if you take a philosophical approach, now I'm talking Washington in that world at that time.
Yeah.
And this was just pre-Reagan. And, Reagan was get rid of government. Government's the problem. And of course, I lean towards that side. But the point was, how do we open up travel? And airline executives at the time were concerned, selfishly, perhaps, or just to protect their own company, which is their job. They wanted to protect their infrastructure, their gates, their ticket counters, their markets. And at one point in time, you could not change a price or fly from Dallas to Chicago without the approval of the federal government. I mean, today people would say, you must be kidding me. And then I was in California with TWA, and AirCal hired me because of my experience in the regulated environment, literally the month it happened in 78. And then all that went away. In California, you couldn't change a fare or a price without going to the Public Utilities Commission, which is like a train or a bus. And those guys were also politicians. So what happened was the unions would come in and ask for a 5% raise, just to get an argument here. And you go back and forth. Let's say you gave them the 5%, right? Then you just added it to the fare. So then you went to the Public Utility Commission in Sacramento and said, I need to raise the price 5%. And they said, okay. And that was it. So where is innovation? Where's technology? Where's price control? Where's cost control? Where's competition? Where's maximum utilization of facilities and airports? They weren't there. So the guys at the time, of which of course Bob Crandall was a vociferous vocal opponent at the time. Bob sort of changed his mind, because I wrote down a couple statistics here. Remarkably, in Americans' case, they went from I don't know, 20 or 30 cities to 220 cities between then and now. So 6 times. The number of people traveling today is somewhere like 4 billion passengers, or 46 million flights a year. And people don't understand the magnitude of these numbers. We'll get into safety a little bit later. But you are so much safer flying than driving. I mean, the numbers aren't even close. But back to 78 and the point, there was great concern about what it would mean, certainly on prices. Because obviously, new entrants coming in, they're going to have a lower cost structure. Their airplanes may be cheaper, maybe not initially, but newer, so maybe maintenance costs lower. Wages certainly lower. And so these new entrants are coming in with a lower cost structure, flying Chicago to New York, and saying to American and the airport authority in Chicago, hey, move out of the way. I need 3 of those gates. And American is saying, but they've been my gates for 50 years. Not anymore, because deregulation did not work without a combination of open markets and open facilities.
I mean, it's funny how cozy and convenient and people just took things for granted back then. Obviously, I'm going from reading and listening to people who were there, but Bob Crandall wasn't alone when he made that statement.
No, he wasn't.
And so many people feared it, and they just thought it was gonna, it was just gonna turn into chaos, which to a degree it did to start with.
It absolutely did,
yeah. But as far as making it accessible and affordable for every walk of life, I mean, that has made such a big difference, because people talk about the golden age, but the golden age was only if you had access through the gates and had the key, because otherwise you didn't experience it. So, it's incredible. So from 1978, what do you feel is the right level of government insight or oversight? What do you think now, looking back? So you've seen everything, and there's good and bad in everything, but do you think it's gone a little bit too much one way and it needed a little bit of correction, or do you think there's a lot more to go?
There's more
And
to
not,
go.
not talking about airports now, because airports is a different issue. We can get onto that as well later.
Let me put it in a couple of different ways because they interconnect if you follow through with my logic. In terms of the future, let's say post 78, yeah, there was a downturn,
Yeah,
but then it picked up and the economy did better, passengers did better, airlines did better. Overall, safety improved dramatically. There was this view that safety would fall apart. It didn't.
correct. Yeah,
So now let's enter in the government. Okay, I have very little regard for government oversight other than basic stuff like security, safety, law enforcement,
yeah,
that sort of thing. And then otherwise just get out of our way, which obviously now is not the case. It's like worse, not just in the US, but the EU is another classic example. And you can sort of go around the world. It's you hand the keys to politicians and they have their own agenda. So things go in a different way. But I can make that point more dramatically by saying there's a 15 to 20% tax on tickets that people don't understand and don't realize. They
yeah,
say, oh my God, what about excess baggage fees? But wait a minute. You know you're being taxed for infrastructure improvement, AKA air traffic control improvements, as an example.
yeah,
We're way behind the times and we're way behind Europe in terms of sophisticated air traffic control systems and technology that today can reduce flying time,
yeah,
change the vectors, improve fuel performance. And the green folks talk all the time about aviation, which is only 2% of CO2 emissions, and say they ought to stop flying.
yeah,
Their focus should be on putting money into technology to reduce the flight time from A to B, which exists and nobody's talking about.
yeah,
That's a government flaw. Another one is the issue that came close, privatization. And here's my view. The FAA got a lot of knocks in the past couple of years because of the Max, the Boeing
yeah,
737 Max, somewhat justifiable, but by no means what was portrayed. It was. And they say, well, other guys are doing the oversight for them. Well, they have set up for years. DARs and DERs are engineering people and representatives of the airlines and their third parties, but they follow strict regulations and procedures from the FAA because the FAA can't do all the inspections on their own. So people imply there's this cozy deal. I've been doing this a long time. I've run a bunch of maintenance departments. I haven't seen a cozy deal yet. Quite the opposite. We have things like advisory directives where you've got to say, hey, I missed an advisory directive goes out and says, there's a crack on the wing on this model airplane.
yeah, yeah,
Like it just recently happened after one of the engines blew up
yeah. That's
just
right.
several weeks ago.
Yeah,
So you have to respond to that immediately. So safety has been improved. But let me get to the final point. I think we should privatize the air traffic control system, the towers and the systems, and leave the FAA to the regulatory compliance and oversight alone. And I can assure you there will be dramatic improvements because why? You're putting it in the private sector, which has proven time and again
more
that
effective.
if you let private sectors run things, they run better and more efficiently. Now, some folks aren't wild about that, including some of the smaller operators and private jets, because they think, well, somehow there's going to be a skew towards benefiting the big airlines more. I've never seen that proven, and I've been through some of these arguments. But at the end of the day, and I think Canada is privatized now, that the FAA does a good job in oversight and regulatory. Not perfect, they're human, but get out of the rest of it. And all those fees, those 15 to 20% fees that go into Never Land, the government gets that money, and what do they use it for? Do you think all of it's going to air traffic control improvements? I can tell you it isn't.
Yeah, yeah, no, yeah, no, that's a problem. Now, you mentioned earlier, and you went der and dar, and it wasn't that you weren't sure what to say, but those little acronyms for people listening. So that's the designated engineering reps and
Yeah,
the designated airworthiness reps, and then
yeah,
you've got the ADs, the airworthiness directives. Now, I totally agree with what you're saying about oversight and compliance and everything. One of the things that I would say though, David, is I think with the Max and Boeing at the time, things did slip a little bit, and
Yes, they did.
too much focus on, shareholders and results and things like that, and it bordered, I think, a little bit on stretching stretching the walls a little. So I think the fact that now they've been brought back, and they've got to be good today to be great tomorrow again, and they need to consolidate now and reflect on some of the things that didn't quite go as it would say in the manual, or as it would say in the rule book.
Well, let me tell you a little something that most people don't know, and I'm not going to tell you everything because I prefer not to, but I know a lot. Over the past several years, let's call it the past 10 years, let's call it pre-Alan Mulally and some of those guys. Alan is one of the best executives ever, and he went on to fix Ford after his time at Boeing. But they concentrated more economically on expense control. But here's the flaw. They also furloughed people or forced people to relocate to other locations. The end result was they were losing some of their history, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Somebody 30 years old, I don't care how smart he is, doesn't know what somebody 60 years old knows. So some of that sophisticated level of oversight and processes were lost along the way. Did they cut some corners? It would appear on this broadcast, I'm not going to accuse them, it would appear from all indications that some of that did happen. Certainly some of the training, and a guy saying, well, geez, if we have to require more training because of the different model, that's cost to us and then the airlines. So how do we make sure we don't have to increase cost and training costs, because it's almost the same model. It's a 737-800 versus the Max. What's the difference? Well, the difference was a couple of things: bigger, different wings, whole bunch of stuff, and some management systems, and cockpit management systems. And the other point, and I should have mentioned it earlier, you have the DER is a designated engineering rep. He does interiors.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to give the audience an idea of what he does versus a DAR, worries about the engines and the exterior. And they're both very, very well licensed and accomplished people that do this. But let me give you a simple example. You want to change the seating inside an airplane. And people think, well, that's easy. Instead of 30-inch pitch, let's give it 32-inch pitch, right? Okay. So what happens next? What happens next is the DER does a new drawing. I'm using simple terms here.
Yeah.
There's a sophisticated word, but let's just go with the simple.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
And the overhead has to change because the oxygen masks come from an overhead that's designed for the 30-inch pitch and the seats.
Yeah.
So when you have to change the seating, you have to have the DER puts out a new plan, and they have to change what they call the spacer panels.
Yeah.
Which are, if you look up and you see the air conditioning units and the lights, they're spacer panels so that you just move these around. People don't know that, but that's one of the things that these folks do that were maligned in the press because, oh my God, they're in concert with the airlines. They're just changing what's called the LOPA. I now recall it's a LOPA is the technical term, but please don't ask me what LOPA means, but you redo the drawings and the seating capacity for that. So that's just one small element of what these folks do in a very complicated business.
Yeah, no, it is. And like you said there, you make one little change and it has a knock-on effect somewhere else, and that knocks on somewhere else, and it keeps going. Yeah, no, but it's something that you don't readily appreciate. Now, Dave, with the back in 78, deregulation, obviously, personally, it was a good thing to do because it opened everything up for people who didn't have access to that world. But as far as governments having control over the fares, the routes, and various market entries, that was clearly not correct. So then you remove the protection, and then, like you said earlier, they don't have their precious gates, their counters, their support facilities. All that's taken away from the legacy carriers, and then there's real competition. So along with a technical boom and the 9/11, deregulation's probably been one of the biggest disruptors or major disruptors of the industry in the last 40 years, and still having the effect, and still, you know, being referred to.
I have a thought, a question.
Yeah.
In the course of 2,000 years, what do you think are the biggest, most significant events that changed the course of history in the past 2,000 years?
Well, one of them would have to be the invention of a pint of Guinness.
Well, I mean, aside from number one, let's start with number two.
Yeah. In the last 2,000 years. Okay, so we got the engine, we got the wheel, engine, the wheel. Let me see what I would think is the most important.
Let me give it to you. Here's the big stuff.
Yeah, go
on. I'm going to talk technology, but first religion. The birth of Christ changed Christianity. I mean, that was a big deal. It wasn't technology, but it was a big deal.
Yeah.
Here's the others that were really significant. The invention of the printing press.
Okay, right, yeah.
Changed the course of the world, because all of a sudden, all this handwriting stuff. So now you were able to disseminate not just the Bible, where it started, but everything else. So the printing press was a huge event. The Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
A couple hundred years ago. Big changes in the environment, the infrastructure, and so on. Today's technology changes with the internet. Dramatic.
Yeah.
There are three of the biggest that have happened. The fourth one is the dramatic change in air travel. It has changed society. It's changed the world map. It's opened up the world to people. It's had societal changes. It's allowed people to see the world, to visit friends, family, unfortunately go to funerals. And the job creation with the airline industry since deregulation has been exponential. And it's not just pilots and flight attendants. It's all the support people on the ground, the fuelers, the hotels, all the other parts of the infrastructure that relates to probably 10 million jobs that were impacted by aviation and deregulation. So I would put that very close to those other three.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. You can see how simple my life is, eh? All I'm interested in is a pint of Guinness, the wheel to be able to get me for a pint of Guinness, and if I'm ill, have some antibiotics to get me better again, so I can have another pint of Guinness. But yeah, but I agree. I agree. It's an incredible thing, and just to be able to, well, firstly, you mentioned about the printing press, so you're able to read about places and understand and get an insight, and then obviously with air travel, it's such an easy thing to get to and from. Amazing. And my God, I can't wait cannot wait to travel again.
Yeah, I'm not going to tell you again what my flight was.
I know. No, I can't be doing that now.
British first class is back on the game.
Yeah, but yeah, no, they're. I mean, I think they're fantastic. But what you've just said there now is a little bit like, you know, as it was, because there you have, you've got those that can, and those that don't even know what they're missing. And that deregulation allowed so many people to open their horizons, their minds, change their ways of life as soon as they were able to access travel like that on aircraft. It's phenomenal.
In 2017, so COVID stuff last year, the numbers are obviously screwed up. 4 billion passengers, 4 billion.
Yeah.
Around the world. This is IATA's numbers. 4 billion passengers. Now that's
amazing, isn't it?
Phenomenal.
Yeah. 46 million, and then you're talking about that four point whatever billion passengers, and then 46 million flights. But you're also then talking about the safety, which is what you refer to, and you know what I mean. In auto accidents, you know, you got 1.3 or 1.4 or 1.5 million people die worldwide. So that's over 3,000 deaths per day, which is incredible.
Yes. So when there's an aviation accident, crash, incident, etc., it gets all the headlines.
Yeah.
And it deserves it, don't get me wrong. And I have a whole group of friends that are junkies on watching the aviation channel and all the different crash stories of Discovery. You know, I mean, it's I love all of it because, you know, I've lived that life, and it's
Yeah.
generally pretty damn accurate. And it's one of the reasons, if you follow those stories, why we've become so safe, because
Yep.
every time there's been an incident, it gets scrutinized and then dissected, and every airline in the world is told via these advisory directives, et cetera, about, by the way, this was caused by either training, flaw, or the crack in a fan blade in an engine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's also gotten much safer. But the dramatic impact, when I think of, yes, the printing press opened up intellectually lots of
Yeah.
people to be exposed to the written word, and the Industrial Revolution brought in, you know, trains and automation and that sort of thing, and technology. But my God, aviation has opened up the world. And I'll get on my high horse again and tell you, I do not understand why it doesn't get the respect in the world that's due. Now, if you talk to an Irishman, talk to a taxi driver, I know most of them by now, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Lots of them travel. They love to go to Thailand. Some of them even have homes in Thailand, you know, and they travel all around. And Ryanair, and I give Mike O'Leary, I mean, he didn't start the airline, but let's give him the credit he's due, opened up Ireland to Europe, and Europe to Ireland, and Europe to Europe. And he did that with low fares. And some people thought some of his practices were extreme, which I did too. I mean, it's not my favorite one to fly from a, you know, from a leg room and all the other stuff. But economically, a lot of people are flying today in Europe because of Ryanair.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, and it's yeah, it's a slick model. You know, obviously people are going to be either supporters or they're going to be against, but at the end of the day, it's a slick model, works well, good safety record. You know, it's a good
Excellent safety record.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just waiting. I mean, the jokes about, you know, having to pay for the toilet or book a toilet and stuff like that, or standing room only. Who knows?
That's Mike.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah, it gets him airtime for free.
Yeah, who knows? Now, Dave, when deregulation happened, there was still certain subsidies and also protecting certain markets. And one of the things that you talk about in the book there is about having this exclusive clause, you know, essential air services, so that communities weren't left high and dry when things changed. And I think, you know, you're talking about some 700 plus communities.
Right.
Would be protected with those government subsidies, and 45 in Alaska, and then 100 plus in the rest of the US. And you also mentioned Puerto Rico. But the criteria for that subsidy, how do they work that out? Because it's X amount of seats, or it's X amount of round trip flights a day, isn't it? And seats.
Well, first of all, it was technically called Essential Air Service, which is still around today.
Yeah.
And it was a combination of passengers into communities and mail service.
Right. Yeah.
And cargo, because that was important. But when deregulation first came out, all these communities were saying, we're going to be dropped by the airlines. We're going to have no more service. So as part of the Deregulation Act itself, it said, okay, we're going to protect you for X period of time. And it started with everybody. Like you just said, you know, 800 and some odd cities. They've pared it back dramatically, but in certain cities, certainly in Alaska, and some very, very smaller communities, there is a essential air service where the government will pay a certain amount of money so that you're not losing dramatically flying from A to B. And these are not capital A to B. These are small A's to small B's, right? And they generally will use smaller airplanes, like a 19-seat Embraer or something like that, but it still provides service. And then they connect that service to a hub. So the government provides some level of economic support on behalf of the cost of providing that service because the demand simply isn't there, but because we need air service to all the communities in the country, and maybe you have to drive 50 miles instead of 5 miles.
Yeah.
But that's kept up until today. And I think that was a smart thing to do.
Yeah, I know. I agree because, I mean, it's only good if everybody's got access to it. So it's a little bit like the vaccine situation we're in now. You know, everybody's only safe when everybody's been vaccinated, and it would be terrible to have deregulation and then for people to lose. So that's the good side. Obviously, the sharp drop in fares is incredible, and you also make record in there that according to IATA, if you look at the values of then and now, and back in 1958, a round trip from New York to Los Angeles was $208, which is the equivalent of 1,570 now. I mean, my God, that'd be a fair old fare now, huh?
Well, yeah, dynamics change every day. And I was looking at going over to New York and Miami while I'm here and looking at the different fares and the competition, and time of day changes, day of the week changes, first coach business, all that changes. But other than a few markets, they're still pretty reasonable. And America just recently came out like yesterday and said, you can buy miles. You know, you get miles when you fly, and you get miles when you use their branded credit card.
Yeah.
They've also said you can buy miles 40% off until June 1st. I think part of that's to generate cash, which I understand.
Yeah.
Some people might say, well, what if America goes out of business? That doesn't appear to be the case these days. There was rumors, but I don't see that any longer. So that's a pretty good deal. So I started to say, well, okay, what's the value of the miles for 2,500 miles versus that deal versus buying a business class or first class ticket?
Yeah.
And with that 40% discount, they're pretty close. The fares are remarkably cheap in comparison to the cost of the infrastructure and to run an airline and an industry.
Yeah.
And that's driven by improved technology.
Yeah.
There's less people because machines are doing a lot of what people used to do. Dramatic improvements in fuel efficiency, arguably 20% on average, and they're real big numbers. Cost control by the airline industry, competition. So airfares are, in my opinion, reasonable, if not a really good deal. Now, there's going to be certain times, maybe the day before Thanksgiving, where they might be higher. But if you buy early on, you shop around, you might find, the best deal possible. But I would argue till the end of days that the industry has been very pro-consumer. The facts are there.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And also as a result of the deregulation, my God, it opened up so much for people to work at airports, for airlines, employee opportunities. The numbers, shot up. I mean, it was an incredible boost for anybody who lived around an airport community, whereas before it was dead man's shoes or who you knew or if you were lucky enough.
If you look at the COVID impact, I mean, just in Dublin alone, they've got a couple of thousand employees that work at that airport. And most of them, have been out of work for almost a year. And that's just Dublin Airport. DFW as an infrastructure, it's not just the crew and it's not just the ticket agents. It's all the infrastructure to run an airport before you start talking about the hotels and everybody else. So if you take a look at COVID as a classic example of what aviation has done to communities and the economy, there's no better time than to look at 2020 versus 2019. And that'll tell the story.
Yeah, no, it is. It's incredible. And coming back to the point where you said about getting recognition and respect or appreciation and not always being knocked, I 100% agree with that. And I think now more than ever, the whole community needs to start to capitalize on the level of interest that the public are showing in aviation, the supply chain, and what's happened and how important it is for everybody's day-to-day life. this is the best time now to start telling people or telling children in schools as young as possible, so they have a different outlook as well, so that they can grow up and see the benefits of it, rather than seeing it as a once a year or twice a year and then looking at the way it gets criticized in the press. Great opportunity now to be a lot more positive about it.
Well, the unfortunate part of education, just to digress for a second, this past year, these kids have been out of school. Can you imagine when we were growing up? I loved school. Not everybody did, but I enjoyed it. It wasn't just the camaraderie, it was the education, it was expanding your horizons. And people have taken a year out of their educational life in the most important time, from like 8 years of age to 18, let's say. Pretty formative years have been decimated. Now, I assume we're going to catch up. I don't think we're going to personally totally catch up, but the educational process has really had an impact. When I start thinking through all of the different areas, aviation, of course, I'm knowledgeable about that, the impact in hospitals, nurses. I saw a statistic recently, it might have been in the London Times, that said that more people are now developing an advocacy for the medical profession, nurses and doctors, than before. Not being a banker, not being a techie, but getting in the medical profession. I thought that was fascinating.
No, it's incredible. It's incredible. But there's things that spark a light in people's heads, minds, hearts, spirit. And there's so many great people who just want to do good things for people. I just think that should never, ever, ever be overstated, how important and how much respect should be given to those people, because it's a calling. It's not something that you do for money, obviously, but it's a calling, and they are so good. It's brilliant.
I can't imagine what these folks have gone through for the past year.
No, it's incredible. And please God, that's the one thing that'll come out of this whole pandemic, is that people will care more and remember longer. It's so important. Now, talking about effects and impacts, one of the things I thought about, I was speaking to somebody last week, and I thought I'd say to you as well. So you were talking there about, the most important things in the last 2,000 years and how aviation. Imagine now going back and sitting with the Wright brothers or Sikorsky or all these guys who did so much at the beginning of the story, and saying to them, do you know something? This is what's going to happen. And in 2020, there's going to be X amount of thousands of these wonderful aircraft that are going to be parked up, whether it's Tucson or the Mojave Desert or wherever. And there's going to be the masters and the queens of the skies. So from the 787 to the 380, and they're going to be retired and they're going to be put away. I mean, I think they turn to themselves, do you know something? Maybe we should go for a swim today instead of starting to fly.
Who would have ever predicted anything would have happened of this magnitude? Unemployment, the impact on the economies of the world, the food chain. Look at what just happened in the Suez Canal. A cargo ship turned sideways.
Couldn't believe
Pretty
it.
narrow place anyhow. Not sure why. That'll be an interesting story itself someday. But it turned sideways and stops commerce from flowing through the canal, which everybody assumed, that's never going to happen. Iran's not going to blow it up. There won't be any incidents. And one day a cargo ship gets stuck and it impacts the economies of the world, the distribution systems. That plus throw in the aviation piece, where we're still not back to maturity, probably for another year anyhow. And as an aside, I just read where I think the British Airways may keep the 380s.
I read that. That was good. I liked that. Was a nice bit of news. But what you're saying there about the canal and about the pandemic and everything, the one thing people have got to be so focused on now is getting better at risk assessments and appreciating risk and doing something about it, not just having it down on a sheet of paper, because most of the things that people thought wouldn't happen and couldn't happen, everybody is fully aware of now has happened.
Well, look at the COVID, 9/11. And then the vulnerability that the internet gives us,
That's the
because
next
when
big
it
pandemic.
goes down
Yep.
or is hacked, British Airways had that hacking problem.
Yep.
Our technology improvements and the maturity of infrastructure, society, whatever you want to call it, comes with it risks and exposure.
Yep.
I mean, who could imagine if New York City went dark, which it did? You remember?
Yeah.
Years ago? A lot more babies were born 9 months later. People were stuck wherever they were stuck, including elevators, and had to walk home. So you see that while we've developed all of these incredible systems to make life easier, you walk into the house and you talk to Amazon, you say, turn on the lights. What's the temperature? How's Chris doing today? I mean, and what's my calendar for tomorrow? And the more we do this, like with cell phones, if a cell phone goes out, people freak out.
Yep.
I mean, like, oh my God, what just happened? Well, somehow we survived. Maybe not as well or not as conveniently, but we survived. And you and I both know there's going to be another event sometime,
Yeah.
whether it's another virus or some dramatic worldwide incident or a solar flare that literally, as we all know, can dramatically overnight or instantly influence telecommunications.
Yep.
I mean, and that can happen. In fact, depending on who you talk to, someday it's going to happen.
Yeah. And
So,
it's a terrible thing, isn't it? That the better we get and the more advanced we get, the quicker the knockbacks come. So the sequence that they're coming in is for every 2 or 3 steps we take forward, we're also going to have to take a little knock or a push back because it's happening, and it's happening more frequently.
maybe there's a lesson here, Chris, and just being philosophical for a minute. We, is not just our generation, although I think the current generation is, some would argue, it's a little bit more spoiled or instant gratification because of the nature of things, versus when I grew up in the 50s and the 60s, the world was different. But we need to understand and enjoy what we have today, because it could be taken away instantly.
Exactly.
And technology improvements in medicine, there's a good example. People are living a lot longer than before. Who would have thought you could do a heart transplant? If somebody brought that up 50 years ago, they would say, and now it's a common occurrence. What's next? I mean, there's technology improvements are going to continue to improve the quality of life. The other side of that is we should make sure that we enjoy that quality of life and not take it for granted.
Yeah.
Because when it's taken away, like, I can't go to Chicago today.
Yeah.
There's no airplanes flying between Dublin and London, where there used to be 15 a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now British has 2 a week, although it's starting to come back. These are changes that almost overwhelm you. Now, just as another aside, the 747, I can't imagine the Wright brothers thinking about a 747.
Yeah.
Much less space travel, much less walking around the moon. But their initial flight at Kitty Hawk took place in the coach section of a 747.
Yeah.
That was the length of the flight.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now you got these 1,000,000-pound, 1,000,002-pound 380s carrying, depending upon configuration, 500 people.
I know, it's amazing.
All around the world. So for you and I, what's it going to look like in 50 years?
I know.
There's going to be hotels up in space. I mean, you're going to be able to go up for a weekend and come on back down. That's going to happen.
Yeah.
We're going to have stations on the moon and in Mars. It's all going to happen.
Yeah, I would love to be around to see it. I would love to, but as true as today is before tomorrow, I don't think that's going to happen. But I would love to, because I think it's going to be so exciting, and people what they've got ahead of them is brilliant. But I think the most important thing is appreciate what you've got today.
Yeah,
because it is so important. What you've got today and who you share it with, so important. Now we come almost to the end again, Dave, and it's flown past this time. And what I wanted to end on just briefly is, obviously, the airline deregulation has moved forward fastly, and it's unfinished as far as its revolution is concerned. Airports. Next step.
Here's the problem and the challenges of airports. I call it the drawbridge mentality.
Yeah.
When you move into a community, you want to be the last one that moves in, because you don't want crowds, you don't want street crowds, you don't want traffic, that sort of thing. People that move near airports know there's an airport there, and then they rally and complain about noise at the airports.
Yeah.
But and I've seen this around the world, and I've lived in these communities. Now I'm oblivious to it because I guess I'm used to it. The third runway that's being finished in Dublin, there's arguments now about takeoff times. The community doesn't want you to take off to 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. Well,
Yeah.
airlines got to start moving earlier than that for economic reasons.
Yeah.
So that argument is on the table as we speak. That's a specific airport situation. We all know about Heathrow and another runway, which would dramatically improve the economics of Heathrow and the community and the UK and Europe. And yet there's still resistance to that. And I can guarantee a lot of those people resisting it bought those houses when that airport was there.
Yeah.
So we are behind, in my opinion, in infrastructure for airports. And I'm going to throw in the air traffic control system and the towers, because they are behind in terms of upgrades and technology and the quality that can improve travel time, reduce fuel, that sort of thing. We mentioned it earlier. In terms of airports, Singapore was building another facility, complex, and one of the most famous in the world. Singapore is like up there at almost number one. That's been put on hold, but that will continue. Singapore is an example of a facility, an airport that's more than just an airport for passengers. Local communities go to go to the movies, to eat, they have entertainment systems there. So Singapore, as they can do more than a lot of other economies in the world, have done that. There are other airports like LaGuardia, which is an embarrassment still. I'm not sure how you easily fix it. It's just so much geography and it's not going to go away. But there have been improvements going on. I haven't seen recently at LaGuardia. Reagan is adding another terminal in Washington, D.C., and they have the space for that. So Dallas, American is adding another terminal, and Dallas is just monstrous. When they bought that property 40 years ago, whatever, it was very far thinking. So there is positive construction going on and development of airports, and technology can only improve that. They're going to have to be dealing with this security/safety vis-a-vis COVID and this whole vaccine passport, which is an issue because one side argues, well, wait a minute, I remember Nazi Germany where you had to be stopped on the street by a policeman to show your papers, right? So some people get nervous, including me, about what's the extreme of that. The other side of that story is, well, to efficiently and safely process passengers, what's wrong with saying, here's my card, I got my vaccine? Well, of course, it opens up for fraud and all kinds of other things.
Usual.
But I think having it is a positive step. On a broader scale to your question, which can be a very complex question, is the interaction between local governments, because remember, they're part of the whole airport operation and management. They have their own structures driven by the mayor and board and supervisors and that sort of thing. So you have those folks with their own political agenda and needs and wanting to get traffic in from all around the world. You have taxes, which are a significant implication. I mean, all these communities have been devastated by COVID because the airport authorities don't have the money to pay the local taxes and bureaucracy and that sort of thing. So that's been an impact. Some countries are better than other countries in terms of airport development and infrastructure. But I would say, and I'm just going to use LAX as an example because I started early on in Chicago and then LAX. LAX didn't have two levels; it had one level, and it was just went around in a circle. Now it's dramatically better. They don't have a lot of ability to dramatically improve, but they have some. Others like Dallas keep adding terminals. So I think we'll continue to see a buildup in the performance of airports. And let me mention one other thing. When airlines were trying to save money, one of the things we did was talk about food on airplanes.
Yep.
So if you remember early on, you didn't have shops at airports. You went to an airport to buy a ticket and fly.
Yeah.
Now, because you might not get a meal on an airplane, you go early and you have something to eat at one of the many restaurants at DFW. You could buy clothes. You go into Heathrow and you could be down on Bond Street.
Yeah. No,
Shops there. So
incredible
and that's been a pretty significant change that I think the consumer doesn't understand, where you sort of moved some of the expense obligation and revenue enhancement away from the cost of your ticket to the infrastructure of the airport. Sort of a win-win when you think about it, between the locals, the employment level, the tax basis, the airlines not having to provide as much in the way of services, and you put that on the ground. Duty-free's always been around, but it's much more significant now.
And one of the best ones ever in Dublin and Shannon, huh?
Yeah, you should see Hong Kong. And by the way, Beijing has, I haven't been to every water hole in the world, as it were, but certainly their duty-free shop in communist China, in Beijing, is something to behold. They have everything you've ever imagined in terms of wine and beers and alcohol and that sort of thing. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, no, it's a different world, David, isn't it? Absolutely. And like I said, there's going to be so many things that can't even be imagined at the moment. And good luck, because it's all exciting stuff and change. And we've come to the end, which is another good segue into the next chapter, because the next chapter is all about ensuring security. So I look forward to that in another couple of weeks. Enjoy your time where you are, and look forward to seeing you. And I know the 2 weeks will fly past, and good to see the book still there on the shelf behind you.
Well, we did a little book
management,
library management. And we got the books back there, a couple of airplanes. And I think I told you when the Berlin Wall came down, I actually was able to get a couple of pieces of the Berlin Wall. So I got 10 pieces, small pieces, and I made 10 plaques. I was in Newport Beach at the time, and I took this little rock, the real deal, nothing phony about it, the real stuff, and put it in this little plaque. And I put the date of when the wall went up and when it went down, and I gave it to 10 of my family and best friends. You could not duplicate that gift. And while the people were doing it at the gallery in Newport Beach, the lady there said, I have been trying to keep these because people see them and say, I will pay anything to have that. And she said, there's only 10, and it's going to this one guy for his family. So that's behind me too. That's a great memory.
Yeah, no, and that's what it's all about. Memories and keepsakes. I'll just finish with something there. During our on the Saturday show and on the post that I put up on LinkedIn, there's a young fella he does incredible things. He's a great lad, and his name's Lewis King, and he's with Albion. And what he's done is he's taken part of the skin of one of the 747s that first flew in 1986, and he's made these lovely little tags out of them. So it's got the reference, it's got the serial number, the call sign, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's really, really nice keepsake.
I saw that, Chris, and I thought that was so darn clever.
Yeah, I'm just so, and they have flown away.
I'll bet.
Danny left, so hopefully he's going to do another run. But people are so pleased to have them. It's brilliant. It's a lovely thing. And especially if you've been lucky enough to fly on that particular aircraft or a similar aircraft. So, yep. Always nice to look back. Memories are for making. Yep. So,
you know what I've always said, Chris, and let me close on another philosophical note. I must be in that kind of mood today. Is that money buys things, and things, generally speaking, depreciate in value.
Yep.
I mean, if you just want to look at it as an economic model, or appreciate depending upon your house, whatever. But
Yeah.
you know, as something, they depreciate in value. Memories appreciate in value over time.
Yeah.
And you can't, I mean, you can buy a house, but you can't buy a memory.
Yep.
Unless, like, over the years, I specifically wanted to see the world. And I have a phenomenal number of memories. And guess what? The bank can't take it away. Nobody can take it away. It appreciates in value. And I hold those memories sacred. So if you gave me a choice between buying a Mercedes or a mansion or another memory via a trip or family gathering or whatever, I choose memories every time.
Yeah, no, that's a fair way to finish. It's a fair way to end. And like you said, the memories appreciate. And my kids sometimes say to me, Dad, every time you tell the story, you get better. And it's always, isn't it? The older you are, the better you were.
And guess what? They can't take it away.
Exactly.
You and your memories. No one can take away your memories.
No, exactly. Listen, it's lovely as always. Been a great pleasure again, and thanks for
Chris.
sharing with us. And we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Great.
All the best, Dave.
Cheers.